Ellen DeGeneres had hosted thousands of game segments over her career, from No or Go to blindfolded musical chairs, but she never expected that a seemingly innocent trivia game would spark the most good-natured rebellion in daytime television history. What started as a routine Wednesday afternoon game show became a lesson in fairness, flexibility, and the power of collective voice that would remind Ellen why her audience was truly the heart of her show. It was a crisp Wednesday afternoon at the Ellen Studios, and the energy was particularly high as they prepared for one of Ellen's favorite segments, Ellen's Epic Trivia Challenge. Ellen, wearing a bright emerald blazer over dark jeans, was excited about today's version of the game, which featured questions about pop culture, current events, and fun facts. The winning audience member would receive a $10,000 cash prize, plus a dream vacation to Hawaii. The game had been a staple of the show for years, with clear rules that had been refined over time to ensure fairness and excitement. Contestants were selected randomly from the audience, asked increasingly difficult questions, and could choose to stop at any time and keep their winnings or risk it all for the grand prize. It was simple, straightforward, and usually filled with moments of triumph and good-natured suspense. All right, everybody, it's time for Ellen's Epic Trivia Challenge. Ellen announced to the enthusiastic studio audience, "Who's ready to win some money today?" The audience erupted in cheers, hands shooting up throughout the studio as people hoped to be selected. Ellen's assistant walked through the crowd with the traditional spinning wheel that would randomly select today's contestant. And our contestant today is... Ellen paused dramatically as the wheel slowed down. Sarah Martinez from Phoenix, Arizona. Sarah, a woman in her 30s with curly brown hair and an infectious smile, practically bounced out of her seat. She was a high school math teacher who had saved for months to bring her elderly mother to Los Angeles for this taping. As she made her way to the contestant podium, Ellen could see the excitement and nervousness radiating from her. "Sarah, welcome. Tell us a little about yourself," Ellen said warmly. "Hi, Ellen. I'm a high school teacher and I'm here with my mom, who's been watching your show every day for 15 years. This is literally her dream come true." Ellen spotted Sarah's mother in the audience, a woman in her 70s who was beaming with pride and waving enthusiastically. "Hi, Mrs. Martinez. Your daughter seems pretty smart. Do you think she can win today?" "She better. I didn't fly all the way from Phoenix to watch her lose," Mrs. Martinez called back, getting a laugh from the audience. Ellen grinned and turned back to Sarah. "No pressure there. Okay, Sarah, you know the rules. I'll ask you questions that get progressively harder. You can stop at any time and keep what you've won, or you can risk it all for the big prize. Ready?" Sarah nodded eagerly, and the game began smoothly. The first few questions were relatively easy, naming the capital of France, identifying the author of Harry Potter, and naming the current vice president. Sarah answered each one confidently, building her winnings to $2,500. "Great job, Sarah. You're doing fantastic," Ellen encouraged. "Now we're getting into the harder territory. This next question is worth $5,000, which would bring your total to $7,500. But remember, if you get it wrong, you go back to zero." Sarah looked back at her mother, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up. "I'll keep going, Ellen. All right, here's your $5,000 question. In what year did the Berlin Wall fall?" Sarah thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. 1989. "That's correct," Ellen announced, and the audience erupted in applause. "You now have $7,500. One more correct answer gets you the grand prize of $10,000, plus the Hawaii vacation." Sarah was glowing with confidence now, and Ellen could see her mother practically vibrating with excitement in the audience. The energy in the studio was electric as everyone waited for the final, most difficult question. "Sarah, this is it. The final question for $10,000 and the trip to Hawaii. But remember, if you get this wrong, you go home with nothing. Do you want to stop now and keep your $7,500, or do you want to risk it all?" Sarah looked out at the audience, many of whom were cheering and encouraging her to go for it. She looked back at her mother, who nodded supportively. "I'm going for it, Ellen. I love it." "Okay, Sarah, here's your final question. What is the smallest country in the world by land area?" Sarah's confident expression immediately shifted to one of concern. Ellen could see her thinking hard, running through possibilities in her mind. The studio fell silent as everyone waited for her answer. "Is it Monaco?" Sarah finally said, her voice uncertain. Ellen paused, consulting her cards with an expression that suggested this wasn't the answer she was looking for. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. The correct answer is Vatican City. Monaco is the second smallest, but Vatican City is actually the smallest country in the world." The audience collectively groaned in disappointment as Sarah's face fell. She had been so close to winning the grand prize, and now she was walking away with nothing according to the show's rules. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but according to our rules, that means you go home with no money today," Ellen said, clearly feeling bad about delivering this news. But then something unexpected happened. A voice from the audience called out, "Wait, that's not fair." Ellen looked up, surprised by the interruption. An older gentleman in the third row was standing up, his expression indignant. "Monaco and Vatican City are practically the same size. That's a trick question. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but the rules are the rules," Ellen replied diplomatically, though she could see murmurs of agreement spreading through the audience. But the gentleman wasn't backing down. "Ellen, with all due respect," Sarah knew the concept. She knew it was one of the tiniest countries in Europe. Monaco and Vatican City are both incredibly small. It's not like she said Russia or something. More voices began joining in from around the studio. "He's right," called out a woman from the back. "That's not fair to Sarah. She was so close," added another audience member. "Give her partial credit." Ellen found herself in an unprecedented situation. In all her years of hosting, she had never faced a coordinated audience objection to the rules of a game. She looked at Sarah, who was standing at the podium looking embarrassed and unsure what to do. "Guys, I understand you feel bad for Sarah. I do too, but we have to follow the rules of the game. We can't just change them in the middle," Ellen explained, though she could feel the audience sentiment shifting against her. A woman in the front row stood up. "Ellen, you change rules all the time. You give away extra prizes. You bring people back for second chances. Why can't you make an exception now?" Ellen paused, realizing the woman had a point. She did frequently bend or modify the show's format when her instincts told her it was the right thing to do. That's different. Those are surprises, not changing the fundamental rules of a game." But the audience was having none of it. More people were standing now, and Ellen could see a wave of gentle but determined disagreement spreading through the studio. "Sarah deserves something," called out a teenager from the middle section. "She got 4 questions right, and was super close on the last one. It's not like she said China or Brazil," added someone else. "Monaco is literally the second smallest country." Ellen looked at her producers in the booth, who were frantically discussing what to do about this unprecedented situation. She had never seen her audience unite so completely in opposition to a decision she had made. Mrs. Martinez, Sarah's mother, stood up slowly. "Ellen, honey, I've been watching your show for 15 years. You always say be kind to one another. Wouldn't the kind thing be to give my daughter something for getting so close?" The audience erupted in applause at Mrs. Martinez's words, and Ellen felt her heartstrings being tugged. She looked at Sarah, who was trying to hold back tears of disappointment. "Sarah, how do you feel about all this?" Ellen asked. "Honestly, Ellen, I'm disappointed, but I understand that rules are rules. I took the risk and I lost. That's on me," Sarah said with admirable grace, though her voice was shaky. This response seemed to galvanize the audience even more. "That's exactly why she deserves something," shouted the original gentleman who had started the protest. "She's being so gracious about it." Ellen found herself in a genuine dilemma. On one hand, she had always prided herself on running fair games with consistent rules. On the other hand, her audience, the people who trusted her and supported her show, were unanimously telling her that this situation felt unfair. "You know what?" Ellen said, making a decision that surprised even herself. "You're all right." The audience erupted in cheers, but Ellen held up her hand to continue. "Sarah, The truth is, Monaco and Vatican City are incredibly close in size. You clearly understood the concept of the question. You were looking for the smallest country in the world, and you named one of the two smallest. That shows real knowledge. Sarah's eyes began to brighten with hope, and Ellen could see Mrs. Martinez wiping away tears of joy. So here's what we're going to do, Ellen continued, feeling the energy in the room shift from revolt to celebration. Sarah, you're not going home empty-handed. I'm giving you $5,000 for getting so close, and because you've been such a good sport about all this. The audience erupted in applause, but Ellen wasn't finished. And you know what? Your mom was right. After 15 years of watching the show, she deserves to see her daughter win something special. So you're also getting a long weekend in Hawaii for you and your mom. Sarah burst into tears of joy and ran over to hug Ellen while the audience gave them a standing ovation. Mrs. Martinez was crying and blowing kisses from her seat, and Ellen felt the warmth and approval of her audience washing over her. But Ellen, Sarah said through her tears, are you allowed to just change the rules like that? Ellen grinned and looked out at the audience, who were all watching expectantly. You know what, Sarah? Sometimes being fair is more important than following rules. And sometimes your audience knows better than you do what the right thing is. She addressed the crowd directly. Thank you all for standing up for Sarah. You reminded me that this show isn't about rigid rules or perfect games. It's about people. It's about kindness and fairness and making sure everyone feels valued. Ellen turned back to the cameras. Folks at home, what you just saw is why I love doing this show. Not because everything always goes according to plan, but because when it doesn't, we have the chance to do something even better. My audience just taught me that sometimes the most important rule is the one that isn't written down anywhere. Treat people with kindness and fairness. The segment ended with Ellen bringing Mrs. Martinez up to the stage for a group hug with Sarah, while the audience continued to cheer their approval. As the cameras stopped rolling, dozens of audience members approached Ellen to thank her for listening to them and doing the right thing. Ellen, that took real courage, said the gentleman who had first spoken up. You could have stuck to your guns and told us the rules were the rules. Actually, it didn't take courage at all, Ellen replied. You all made it easy by showing me what the right thing to do was. I just had to be smart enough to listen. The episode aired exactly as it had happened, with no editing to minimize the audience revolt or Ellen's rule change. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with viewers praising both the audience for standing up for fairness and Ellen for being willing to admit when a rule needed to be bent in the service of kindness. 3 months later, Sarah returned to the show with updates from her Hawaii trip and a thank you video from her students, who had been following her story. Ellen, that day taught my students something really important, Sarah said. It taught them that sometimes standing up for what's right is more important than just following rules blindly. Ellen nodded thoughtfully. And you all taught me something important too. You taught me that the best decisions are made, not by one person following a rule book, but by a community of people who care about fairness and kindness. The incident became a defining moment for Ellen's show, referenced frequently in later episodes when similar situations arose. Ellen began incorporating more flexibility into her games, often asking the audience for their input when situations seemed unfair or when contestants were particularly gracious in defeat. What happened that day with Sarah, Ellen reflected months later, reminded me that my audience isn't just there to be entertained, they're part of the show. They're my moral compass, and when 400 people all agree that something isn't right, I need to listen to that. Because sometimes the most important lesson comes not from following the rules perfectly, but from being brave enough to change them when fairness demands it. And sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the collective voice of people who care enough to speak up for what's right.